Hello, I'm Dr. Bond. This is the Bond Report, BAFA 17, Gresham's Law. We begin with a little talk of Lord Melbourne. He said, "Gentlemen, this is about governments and governments. Gentlemen exist to repel invaders, punish crime, and enforce contracts. And in all else, it is a damned pernicious thing." We're going to go through an example from my own life here today. Thomas Gresham was a prominent factotum, financial type guy in the time of the Tudor dynasty. Henry VIII wasn't still around, but he served three Tudor monarchs. He did Edward VI or VII, he did Bloody Mary, and he did Elizabeth I. He was the financial center of Europe at that time was Antwerp, and he's trying to get some of this moved to London. He correctly anticipated that there's going to be some Catholic Protestant trouble, and the Habsburgs are on the continent, and he's trying to get more of the financial centers in London. And Gresham's Law simply states bad money drives out good. When he was the main guy for the British economy, they were trying to introduce some paper money. He also was instrumental in founding some stock exchanges. During this stock exchange, he made the memorable comments from watching bubbles, such as the South Sea bubble. The four most expensive words in English are "this time it's different." So we have Lord Gresham, finance guy. They're trying to get a program going where they can use fiat money, paper money. The government assigns this intrinsically worthless paper and says this is the value of, whatever money they're using, $10, this piece of paper is worth that, rather than your gold or your silver, which actually have a value in themselves, in the coin you have at home. Unlike gold, this paper has no real value. And so the people that have used gold and silver all their lives are correctly going to suspect this, because what they'll do, they'll trade their goods and services for the money which is paper, which this week the government, before paper money is well established for generations, for this paper which the government says is worth, $10, $20, but that's worth that this week, and maybe next week or next month or next year, they decide that money isn't worth anything. And now it's valueless, what I've accumulated for my very real goods and services, whereas if I have gold and silver, they've got a value. So basically, what people will do in an economy of that type, when they don't trust the paper for whatever reason, or trust it less, is they will circulate the paper, and soon there'll be no gold or silver in circulation. People will hoard that, and they will put out their paper money. So bad money drives out good. You're defending yourself. When you hoard your gold and silver, they'd call it hoarding. We would call it common sense. Here's Wild Bill. He said he'd never killed a man except in self-defense, but found he was defending himself almost constantly. Well, that guy is defending himself from that government saying the paper money is worthless. Well, I'm just pursuing common sense. I never killed anybody except in self-defense. They call me a hoarder. I'm just a guy protecting himself. Now, we're going to do a little paradigm shift here where I'm going to talk about something else, and these subjects are going to, I think, come together. Getting patients ready for surgery in an ideal fashion and getting them into an ideal state so your surgery will be safer, more effective. There's a lot more going on with that than meets the eye. If you're the general public or a casual observer, there are a lot of activities going on that are done better by professionals, and there's a great deal of care that's taken, whether this is apparent to the patient or the observer or not. And this can often be quite elaborate. So you go if you're the surgeon, you go by, you swing by, you see these patients on the way in. People will have the idea, as Edna St. Vincent Millay did, she sort of said that life is just one damn thing after another. That's not true. It's the same damn thing over and over. Now, as Sam Spade had said, there's a certain amount of trouble. It's hard not to do my poor Humphrey Bogart imitation here, but I don't mind a reasonable amount of trouble. And Dashiell Hammett wrote it before they had the movie, but just the same. And yet, we see a guy standing here by the place where I'm going to say where they get patients ready. And here's a guy who's not afraid of work, and yet the system has been the same for many years. It's been well understood. It's worked quite well. And here's a guy who's not afraid of work, but he's done his work, and it's done, and it's satisfactory, and it works just fine. And we're doing it the same way we've done it for years. And along comes a bureaucracy, living in fear that somebody's doing something productive that they haven't figured out a way to tax or regulate. And gee, we have a system here that already works fine. What is their exact motivation? As Marlon Brando would say, the method actor, what is your motivation to change something that already works fine, whether or not you'd ever been born? At that time, the word meaningful use was what at that time happened to be the Obama administration. They're looking for ways to make sure you're using this computers. We're just more or less coming out in a big way for your medical records, for your other things. And one of the definitions and key phrases and catchphrases they used was meaningful use. Well, the word meaningful began to become meaningless. And we find that as we're trying to force feed computers in the general run and show how essential they are, computers make it possible to do a great deal more work, but it tends to be pointless work than anybody ever dreamed of doing because it was nothing you do with actual work. It was just work for the sake of work, where you're piling things up. The second point I'd make with this is hospitals are fine and computers are okay, but they bring out the worst in each other. And so what we have is an exercise in formal logic, the bureaucrat's syllogism, which is, we must do something. Well, this is something, therefore we must do it. Whatever it is, for whatever reason, for whatever flimsy nothing. I took this picture here because of his resemblance to the devil, and also the arch thing of thinking you preside over everything and nothing much can happen without you. And they'll think of some reason. Let's take a system that already works by our logic, and this works fine in practice. We just can't seem to get it to work in theory, as Alice meets Tweedledum and Tweedledee. You're going, one says, well, no how, that's so-and-so, and the other says, contrariwise. If it would be, if it was so, it might be, and if it were so, it would be, but as it isn't, it ain't. That's logic. And the bureaucratic logic runs kind of Tweedledum, Tweedledee. There's no, you'll go back and try at what point you went wrong, and the answer is you were wrong to begin with. And also when people believe that they're accomplishing something, in this case, well, gee, we can use the computer for this. Well, yeah, you can. But it'll take about 3 times as long, cost you much more, and no one in their right mind would do this because it adds additional work, which is pointless. What is the real reason? Will people believe this harder than real fact? We have Ouida. She's big in the second half of the 19th century. And she said, however, power is sweet. And the person who has a little bit of power, a postal clerk, a DMV clerk, loves that every bit as much as any Roman emperor with absolute power that ever lived, and perhaps a little more. The lady at the DMV likes her power just as much as Caligula did. And this is what the point is. And so we have boondoggles, bureaucrats, as they try and say something is true that isn't true. And thus you have the bureaucrats are going to introduce computers into the patient's getting ready system. The nurses, and usually nurses that have to go over prepping these patients, have to do about 4 separate steps with a computer so you can record and have a computer thing of all these things that were done before that weren't recorded on a computer. And gee, now we have something. We still have nothing. It takes us 3 times longer to do it. It's meaningless on the face of it, but gee, you've introduced computers into your system, so you're more progressive. Bad money has driven out the good, and the irony here is that this bureaucratic work, so you can accumulate useless data for bureaucrats, doesn't do anybody any good. So you still have real work, meaningful work, but since that's so much easier to check and audit because it's on a computer already, it will be the part of the work that they do in fact audit and check because it's easy. And therefore, the bureaucratic work will be done more conscientiously, and it takes about much longer than the actual work did, which it's said to be able to help, which it's not helping. So the bureaucratic work, where you're keeping up with this thing that they can check and contributes nothing to surgery or patient care, has to be done at the same time with the same staff. And so you like triple the work, but you're for nowhere. So here's your poor nurse. Gee, it sure is a lot of work getting these patients ready, which it was. And you wanted that to be correct. But now it gets better. Since the pointless work is the part of the work that's easy to check, you've taken the same people, given them 3 times the work, 2/3 of it useless, and made them do all of that work rather than the third of it that they did before that actually was necessary, that seemed to help. The bad money has driven out the good money. Boy, gee, we're harried, we're overworked. It sure takes a lot of time getting this patients ready when, 2/3 of my time I've got to screw with doing some other things. So we have bureaucracy and its baleful effects. This is what I'm trying to say. I wanted to get at some of the essence. Why do people hate bureaucrats, bureaucracy? Why do they hate it so much? And I believe it's this monkey talking here. This one happens to be a little better dressed than a lot of them. But there's somebody wearing a suit or a tie or something saying to you, listen, I can't even tell you, if you were saying to this, I don't even know what a bureaucratic job is or what it means, but whatever your job is, if you're talking to the bureaucrat, you would tell him, whatever your job is, I think a chimpanzee could do it. And since you're certain that you, with no training, no experience, no expertise, no nothing, and yet, well, I think a chimpanzee could do your job, Mr. Bureaucrats, you believe that you could do my job with no training, experience, or knowledge much better than I can, just glancing at it. And you make that assumption about everything, about every job that you don't understand, which is all of them. And you're going to regulate that, have good ideas for that. Nothing could be further from the truth. And whatever you do will be a snare, a delusion, and an entrapment. I'm with Dr. House on this. Arrogance has to be earned. Be as arrogant as you like, but for God's sake, earn it. Have something to back that up. And so what these guys have done, Thomas Hardy here said it, there's a thing worse than blindness, and that thing is seeing something that's not there. I'll give an example. Here we have a perceived deficiency in the way you work patients up by people that don't actually operate on them or know anything about it. Here's Oscar Madison. He didn't really exist, but you believed in him. He is a convincing, non-existent thing. And yet, I can discuss Oscar Madison with anybody. I believed in him. He doesn't exist. Theodore Roosevelt saying it the best. The art of government, the art of having to do things arbitrarily, consists of looking for trouble and finding it, whether it exists or not. The system of getting the patients ready worked fine without any bureaucrat anywhere ever having been born. And yet they insert themselves in the process, make it much more difficult, waste time, and say that that's what the work is now. So meaningless data will now be compiled by a machine about nothing they understand, because it's people just putting nonsense into nonsense, people have no idea what they're looking for, and idiotic decisions will be made by uninformed goobers about nothing. Now, fortunately, the bright spot of this is their recommendations will be so far off base that they'll be ignored by the people actually doing the work. But here they are around their table, wasted time, people spending my tax money doing something that doesn't have to be done. All they are really certain of is, given any problem, as this little guy on the left, these guys talk about that and formulate their strategy. All they're really sure you'll need to do is, if you have a problem, throw some money at it. Let's make this time 100 times more expensive than it ever was to do work that doesn't have to be done, to solve this imaginary problem that never existed. So we have here an uninformed problem, an uninformed solution to a non-existent problem, creating other things. Will Rogers saying it, thank God you don't get all the government that you pay for. Thank God. Last shot at bureaucracy. One other time, this same arrogance, you're not only regulating it, but the worst policy, they don't even get anybody in there who's ever worked a patient up. They just get a guy who thinks he knows what it might be like somewhere, who saw some people working somewhere once. The worst policy, in virtually all cases, is one made in secrecy by the experts. They define what an expert is. It'll seldom be a guy who's actually had the job. What you're getting is the mathematical output of this given entity. In all cases, at all times, the bureaucratic entity will seek to do, as Herbert Hoover said, three things: self-perpetuate, expand, demand for more power. You have a physical force there coming out of this that you've introduced. It will do these things predictably at all the time, whether there's no problem to solve or not. And then the solution will be meaningless. It'll be unrelated. Once again, the bureaucratic syllogism, we must do something. This is something. Therefore, we must do it. Secretary General Boutros Boutros-Ghali said the real way to deal with bureaucracy is stealth and sudden violence. I mean, right out of the United Nations, not known for stealth or sudden violence, and yet here they have the solution made by this. To close, once again, Lord Melbourne, government, gentlemen, exists to repel invaders, punish crime, and enforce contracts, and all else it is a damned pernicious thing. Well, I rest my case. Thank you very much. Please subscribe. Please watch. Thank you.